welcome to the LA Venture Podcast. This is Minnie Ingersoll, host of the podcast and partner at TenOneTen. TenOneTen is a seed stage fund here in LA. All opinions expressed on this show by me and my guests are solely our own. Taj Eldridge is one of the founders of a new $250 million fund, Include Ventures. Include Ventures is split between a $125 million fund of funds and $125 million for direct investments. Include Ventures is a brand new fund that Taj started with Keith Spears and Bahiyah Robinson. For the past 2.5, almost 3 years, Taj has been director of investments at LACI, the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. Taj, thanks so much for coming on the pod.
Minnie, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And long LA, thank you for this. Love this.
Yeah, well, longer LA now that Include Ventures exists. I'm very excited. Maybe start and just tell me more about this new fund.
Yeah, well, the conversation happened about, ironically, a year prior to last year. Last year there's been a lot of talk about diversity in our industry, but it started all around with a conversation with a high net worth individual about how can you truly reduce the wealth gap? My answer was ownership. Ownership can happen whether or not the company is founded by, a founder of color. If a person of color has ownership in the company, if they're vested in the company, if they're hired in C-suite, that creates wealth, that creates ownership. And I looked at two ways from it. I looked at the PayPal Mafia and how that was created, right? Because none of those were truly founders, they were part of the ownership that then branched out. And then since we're in entertainment in LA, I looked at, some people might realize, the Wu-Tang Clan, which is similar to that came together, created an organization, then branched out, and each went to different labels and had ownership there.
You compared Wu-Tang to PayPal, which I thought was good.
Yeah,
that was
absolutely.
strong.
I have to give you my music founder analogy. Founders are like artists. Venture funds are like record labels because they fund the artists or fund the founders. Accelerators and incubators are like the radio stations of Spotify. That's how you discover the great artists and the great founders. So that's my little music analogy there.
So is Peter Thiel then like ODB or like?
See, I was gonna say Suge Knight for Peter Thiel, but you're getting it. You're getting it. That is the LA way. That's LA venture. That's LA venture at its soul is bridging entertainment and venture and all sort of stuff. We can go on. And so that's what started this whole conversation about Include Ventures. I was lucky to have two partners with Bahiyah Robinson and Keith Spears. Keith Spears came from the institutional investment with CalPERS and Hamilton Lane, who was famous for funding Vista Equity Partners. And then Bahiyah Robinson. Bahiyah started VC Include about 4 years ago as a way to get more people of color into venture funds. And I'll be honest, when I first was at the first venture fund I was at, outside of taking Brad Fell's venture deals, there was really nothing else out there to really kind of train you. The same way that we give a lot of training for founders with accelerators. I mean, you have things like the Kauffman Foundation, but $80,000. And so, we came together, and that was the first part of that in creating this opportunity.
Okay, so VC Include was started a couple years ago, not to be confused with Include Ventures, because they sound kind of similar.
Think of VC Include as an accelerator for fund managers that provides training and provides platform services. And Include Ventures was started because we already have all these relationships with these funds that we've trained as emerging fund managers. So that's why it made just great sense to start a fund to be able to fund it.
Got it. So VC Include started as kind of a platform for diverse managers, but there wasn't funding behind it to actually invest into their funds.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was funny. I sent a tweet out recently and it kind of caused a little bit of a controversy where I said that we have enough mentoring. We need business. We need to do business together, right? And so I think that came from that. And like I was mentioning, the original conversation happened with a high net worth individual when we were talking about wealth gap reduction. We talk about ownership is the key. And I'll be honest, when I was in the fund, I remember emerging management programs that were so hard to get into as an emerging manager. They might as well not even call it an emerging manager program.
So yeah, tell me a little bit more. I think it's first-time fund managers, usually people raising 10 to 100 million. Yeah,
absolutely. Actually, we went down as far as micro funds. So we've even for our fund to fund investments, we will work with some micro funds at $5 million as well. But yeah, it's working with fund managers that are majority owned by Black or Brown individuals. And one of the things we wanted them to have is a focus on ESG, environmental social governance. We wanted that to be the underpinning of what they did, both in valuing it and having some type of focus on measuring it. Another program that we did, so we partnered with Gender Smart, with Suzanne Beagle, to do a program called Capital Connect, getting with women fund managers as well, because that's another entity that we've seen that hasn't had a lot of women-owned funds that are out there really raising a large amount of capital. So that's another organization that we partner with to have another type of fellowship happening as well. I mean, you had a guest on your show that's one of my favorite people, Tracy Gray. She goes on, and she tells you about the lack of support for her as a Black woman and even Latinas as well in our industry.
I could have talked to her for hours. And so for Include Ventures, will you fund funds outside of VC Include and vice versa?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So Include Ventures is focusing on not just fund ones, but fund twos and fund threes. And the reason I saw that too is that there was a lot of funds and even founders that I saw that may have been successful in raising a seed round, but have a little bit more difficulty in raising later stage rounds as well for whatever reasons. And I think the same thing is on the capital side for fund managers. A lot is changing now. We have some Black unicorns, some of the first Black unicorns that I've seen in years with Topi and Calendly and many others. But I think that, you know, once we start doing this, we'll see it'll be less about a moralistic issue and more about really achieving alpha. To give you a perfect example, if we look at diversity as far as geographic diversity, I'm from Texas. And if anybody would come to me and say, I want to have a market in Texas, I want to sell this product in Texas, I could tell you all day long about how the people in Texas are going to react to this product. I can tell you that a Cybertruck would not sell in Texas, but a Rivian absolutely would sell. That's the benefit of having diversity in your team, and the benefit, from my opinion, of having people diverse on the fund manager side too.
I was chatting with Austin Clements, and he has this amazing blog post, and I think it's the same point you're making, which is, hey, don't invest in diversity because you feel like, I don't know, like it's a moralistic argument, but do it because it achieves alpha, right?
Absolutely. I look at the same way I do it in clean tech. Like LACI's, we keep mentioning LACI, my apologies, LACI is the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. So of course, clean tech 2 years ago, it was a dirty word, nobody wanted to hear it, and now we're kind of in vogue. But the same way I look at clean tech is the same way I look at diversity. Don't invest in clean tech just because it's a moralistic issue or it's future proofing. As we've seen in what's happening in Texas now with the grid and everything else, it's something that's happening now. It's a public health issue. It's an economic issue. It's a social issue. And I think the same way. And I totally agree with Austin.
And was that something you considered when you were raising this fund, like raising from the people who understood this, or how did you think about raising money?
Yeah, for the fund, absolutely. And I'll be honest, for me, I have, again, as this person in music, I have this dream that what's going to separate Los Angeles from any other market is our history of entertainment. But that also means there's a lot of capital that people who've been telling stories have made from entertainers, from athletes, what have you. So that was the first community that we went to raise capital, because we felt like that community would understand this more than the traditional. Because I'll be honest, I've been in venture for a very long time. And a lot of the institutional capital could have done this before, but they hadn't.
Does it bother you at all that it's trendy, or is it like, great, it's trendy, bring it on?
You know, that's a really great conversation. And some of the founders I talked to have said it, that they don't want to get funding or they don't want to get into it just because they're Black. And my thing is, well, I've seen the opposite side of that. I've seen not getting money because I'm Black. So you know what, right now, let's just move things forward. For me, in an ideal world, what I would love to see is not just, you know, all Black companies or all Latinx companies or all women companies. I want to say a company that resembles Los Angeles. The reason I came to Los Angeles and fell in love in Los Angeles is because I can go one part of down the street and get a Korean taco, and then the next road of the street I can get a falafel, and then the next I can get you know, some Jewish soup.
Do you have thoughts on what's worked or what hasn't worked in the past?
Yeah, I think I'll be very frank. I think LA is real, and I know I may sound like a broken record, and I may sound very biased, but you know, I spent time in the Bay and I spent time here in LA. I think LA is attempting to do it right. We have a lot of support programs that are not just face value. I think the younger generation getting into venture after you and I are going to change it completely. And I'm okay with that. I'm for that, actually.
So tell me more about, I think you said it's not mentorship, but it's training. Tell me more about what goes into that platform and that training.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tackle the platform first and then the fellowship. We've been seeing the rise of platform services with funds that work with founders, where you come in as a founder, and we have it at LACI as well. And prior to LACI, I was at the University of California, Riverside as the accelerator director. I had a similar content there. It's called shared services. And the whole idea is that you would have legal, financial, marketing, HR, PR, all these services that you would normally need as a founder, you would have it similar to the fund manager. So all of those platform services are available from pre-vetted. And so fund managers coming to the VC include have access to that, as well as access to making connections with limited partners. And again, it's the things that I think when I was raising funds early on that I wish I would have known outside of the book. We want to give them, we want to make it to where they can concentrate on making great investments, and all of the mechanics of their fund, they've learned from dealing with other individuals that's there through the fellowship. So having the support of MacArthur Foundation, Visa, and UBS is really important to make it free for those fund managers.
Do you have any examples of some of those lessons learned that you are passing along?
I think that when a person says, I want to break into venture, I want to start a fund, the first thing they think about is investing. But one of the things they don't think about is human resources and managing their team. Mm-hmm. There was a tweet that came out that I thought was really interesting that said that venture funds are essentially financial marketing companies. Right. And I think from that standpoint, there's a bit of understanding how do you really position a company, how you build a culture even within your own firm. One of the things that I had to learn as well, and I think there's a fallacy that says that if you're diverse, you don't need diversity training. That's poppycock. And we was having this conversation about biases of us against people who may not have degrees like we have. Right. And so we were talking about this, discussing this company. It's a really great company called Very Cool, that's based in Northern California in the packaging space. The CEO only has an 8th grade education, dropped out of high school, former gang member, went to prison, but just raised $16 million in a series. The question that we had to ask ourselves is that, would we be biased against that person because of their lack of education? They didn't go to not even just a top school, but just a school period.
How about tips for fundraising? I mean, that seems to be the thing that everyone wants to know is how can I raise a $250 million fund? Or how can I raise my $20 million fund?
Yeah, absolutely. I look at, first of all, I tell founders, as a fund manager, it is, in my opinion, a little bit harder to raise than a founder, but some of the same things that I think are true. I always look at fundraising as an art and a science. The science piece of that is what we all kind of know, like building a great data room, making sure you have all the information. The art, for me, the art is about relationships and building relationships. I love the story of fund managers like Jordan Fudge. And if anybody knows the story about how he raised his fund, he met the person who ended up being part of that fund or helping with the fund at the gym, having questions, exercising. So I think that's a part of it, because a lot of times too, we think, I just need to do a formal pitch. Sometimes it's about just having a conversation. And, I always would talk about this whole idea about what I call the banker's dilemma in social. Similar to when you have a banking account, you make deposits and you take withdrawals. But if you take more withdrawals than deposits, you'll be negative. The same way in relationships. You want to build more deposits into people than withdrawals. And I think that's the problem I see with a lot of fundraisers is people are fundraising. They always want connections. They always want contacts so they can make the pitch. But what are they doing as deposits into those relationships? And I think that's what benefited us is that the team and I, the three of us, we made a lot of deposits in relationships through the years that now that we're ready to make those withdrawals on, and it benefited us greatly.
Yeah, and I think certain industries have more of that. I think some people have been burned before, and so they're hesitant to give up their connections and give first because they're afraid they're going to get taken advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. Fear is a very controlling emotion. And I think, I always joke with my partner about this. I really believe in intuition, and I very much believe in women's intuition. I know this sounds blasphemous for us to not use science, but we're human beings that have emotions and feelings for a reason. I think there's a fallacy for us to not use emotions when we're making decisions, because I think also too, we can feel the energy when there's some negative energy coming around. And the times that it didn't work was the times that I did not pay attention to the energy that was coming about.
Yeah, you can feel the negative energy. You can feel the positive energy too.
No, absolutely.
Bahiyah is your partner, Bahiyah and Keith. So it's the three of you, right?
That's correct.
And so Bahiyah started VC Include. And give me a little bit more color on the two of them.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Bahiyah is she's the face of the firm, but what I love about Bahiyah is she's an ecosystem builder. She's definitely built the ecosystem, not just here, but also in Africa as well. Because one of the things we also believe that bringing more diverse voices into venture is going to also spread the opportunity outside of the United States. Keith comes with a more button-up institutional background, and I love his experience. The one thing that I love is some of the listeners may have heard of Vista Equity Partners with Robert F. Smith, which is one of the wealthier private equity funds that are out there, African-American owned. His firm, him, is the one who gave that company the seed money to start when he was at Hamilton Lane. And so that for me, if the whole idea is about wealth creation and wealth building and reducing the wealth gap, there's no other person I would have on my side than Keith. And I think he's been like instrumental. And then he also managed some accounts with CalPERS, which is the California Public Retirement System.
That's awesome. Now I hear your dog, but it's okay. Like that's part of the fun.
And the sad part about it is I'm a cat person, and there are 4 dogs in my house. So I'm hoping the dogs can disappear in the next 2 seconds.
It's okay. And just give me a little bit more about you.
You know what? I would say, well, I give you, I grew up in Texas. So, anybody that's from Texas, once a Texan, always a Texan. But when I was in school, I actually wanted to be a rapper. And that's why I majored in poetry and literature, because my parents said, I don't care what you're going to be, you're going to go to college. And so I said, I'll show you, I'll be in poetry. And when I graduated, of course, I didn't put out an album, but what I did learn was the aspect of storytelling. I understood that people are connected with what they buy through those stories. And I worked in banking, Wells Fargo Bank for a decade, then worked in private equity, started investing there. And then that's when I got the bug of where the bidding of startups. The first few startups failed miserably, learned a lot from that. And then I was blessed to be an advisor and part of companies that got acquired. And then was at a startup that was in the wine space. And that's when I started recognizing clean tech, was because a lot of the winemakers were having issues with climate, with the product. And that was my first kind of introduction to climate tech. And from there, I was recruited by the University of California. I led their accelerator in Riverside. And I was excited that in 2017, we made UC Riverside, the ecosystem, the number 4 place in the nation for diverse entrepreneurs. And we did that by ensuring that everybody had access to information. It was all about access. It was about access to information. And a little bit was my Coachella. And then I came to LACI in 2018.
I feel like you're just going to be super popular with this fund. So let me make sure I understand what sort of companies you're going to be investing into. Because we didn't really cover that yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 funds, 2 separate funds. The 125 is going to be fund of funds. And that's going to be for Black and Brown led fund managers with an emphasis on ESG. What we like to say is we like to see funds that impact how you work, how you live, and how you thrive. So it kind of gives us a very broad base of funds that we wanted to invest in. The other 125 for the direct investments is going to be used twofold. That'll be used for follow-on investments for great companies that we see our fund managers making investments in. So that's what we want to do. And then the other piece of that, of course, is making direct investments outside of our follow-ons, just great companies that we may see that may be in the clean tech space, healthcare tech space, media, and fintech, because that's what our core team has.
That's great. Is Very Cool, the one you mentioned, is that in your portfolio, or have you started doing direct investments yet?
We haven't started doing direct investments. I'll be very frank, that's definitely one of the companies I'm extremely interested in. One of the things I failed to mention is, in addition to that, I serve on the board of of Homeboy Industries, which is an organization here in Los Angeles that takes former gang members and current gang members and get them into the workforce. So they just launched a fund that I serve on the board of. And so I have a lot of family members in my own family. They were former gang members, formerly in prison. So that's something that's very important to me. I'm also an advisor to this company called Concreates, which is a media agency that started with this LA-based company called MeUndies. They were the marketing agency for MeUndies, but it's owned and operated by all former felons. So Very Cool is definitely one of those companies that kind of fit a few things. It started by a founder of color. The person is a former gang member, former incarcerated individual. And also, too, it's in sustainable packaging, which is clean tech, and I love it.
Yeah, it's great. I had Andrew Glazier from Defy Ventures on.
Yeah.
And he was just talking about, the people coming out of prison, they got hustle, they got entrepreneurial spirit, and they're going to bust through walls to make things happen.
So the company that I'm an advisor on, they're Defy graduate, and I was a volunteer with Defy. But I have to be very frank, and I'm gonna be very transparent. When I participated in Defy, and there was a lot of great people there with me, but it was only 2 people of color that was on the side of us as volunteers, and then on the other side of prisoners, everybody was a person of color with the exception of 1 or 2. And so it was this weird feeling that I had about being in a space. But I tell you, if anybody's listening to this, Defy is a great organization to volunteer with. Definitely volunteer with them. Listen to our episode with Andrew. Andrew's a good guy. We partnered with Defy over in 2020 when the CARES Act came out. If people understand, when the CARES Act came out with PPP, entrepreneurs that were former felons, they were denied funding. They were denied CARES Act support. And so we partnered with a number of different people, like the rapper Common and Sean Combs. And we started a relief fund to help provide capital to it. And then with the exposure that we had, the government ended up changing their laws on the CARES Act. So things like that, I love how capital can be activists as well. And I think that's what we're going to see a lot more of. We're going to see a lot more activist capital happening, whether we like it or not.
Mm-hmm. And how about LACI? Are is LACI going to be recruiting for a new director of investments?
I'm going to stay at LACI because my job at LACI is really threefold. We manage the impact fund and our debt fund. We educate our founders on fundraising, and then we bring new investors to the ecosystem. So I'll be working on the third piece of that now that I'll be working on my own fund. So I think it just works hand in hand. If I'm already investing in a number of funds in the fund of funds, and they're focusing on ESG. And what I believe that clean tech is going to be normalized. We're going to have a situation where it's not going to be in this separate space, similar to how I don't believe impact is going to be in a separate space.
So rather than like, this is a clean tech investment, it's like, this is a packaging investment, and it happens to have clean tech as part of it.
Absolutely.
So tell me more. I feel like you have a lot of depth that we can all learn from. And like, I'd love to hear some about your kidney disease, like whatever you feel like comfortable sharing. Like, when did you find out? How did that happen? What was the reaction?
Thank you for that. I am an advocate for, the National Kidney Foundation. And I'll be frank, before I was sick, I never really thought about it, definitely out of my mind. And ironically, I have my cousins who I later found out have the same disease that I have. And, it was to a point, and I think a lot of minority families hear this, where a person gets sick and you don't really know why. You just know they were sick and you never really discuss it. You never really talk about it. And around in 2018, I was, actually what happened was 2008, I was getting a little bit tired, and I thought it was just me being a founder and burning the midnight oil. Went to my doctor, and he's like, "Oh, nothing wrong with you. You're African American. That's just par for the course. You're a founder, blah, blah, blah." So for 10 years, I had this disease and didn't know it. And I was at an event, and I met with this doctor who was a minority doctor. And I was joking about, because I was saying, I can't get Keyman insurance because, this whatever is making me, is tired. And the look on her face was a look of horror. And she said, "You need to get a biopsy tomorrow." And I did just that. And by the time I did, I was stage 5.
Oh, God.
Which means if I had not met her, we wouldn't be talking today. When you're stage 5, which means you have immediate kidney failure. So since 2018, I've been on dialysis, and I have to do it 3 days a week, 4 hours a day, 4 to 5 hours a day. And what that did, that made me think about a lot of different things differently. It made me start thinking that alpha means nothing if I'm not here. What difference does it make we're making this returns when the world is like it is? So that was a calling card for me to really kind of focus on sustainability and to focus on just really trying to support founders that are trying to make a difference.
Wow. And so you find out and you're still able to keep your job.
Yeah. I have to get, and this is the reason why I am staying with LACI, even with Lunch by Fun, because I found out that literally the day I got hired at LACI is when I found out my diagnosis. And I have to say this, the founder of LACI, his name is Neil Anderson. He was like, I got you. And I'll be honest, I don't care how much they paid me. I don't care what my job was. Him thinking of me as a human meant way more to me than anything else. And that's what got my loyalty. And I think that's a lesson for founders to realize too, is that treat your employees like humans and treat them with dignity and respect. And I think they would do the world for you.
Yeah. Do you think it affects how you spend your time? Do you prioritize your life differently now?
I do. And I think I'm much more efficient because if your listeners ever know anybody with dialysis or have seen somebody on dialysis, you're literally stuck. I call it the matrix. So you're literally stuck in the matrix. Your hands are bound because you have needles in one arm and something, your other arm is bound. So you're just there for those 4 hours in a chair. But even now, I'm talking to you through my glasses that are speakers and microphones. And again, I'm going to go here too. We talk about diversity from a standpoint of gender, race, and we're finally kind of talking about age, but we never mention people with disabilities when we talk about building tech. This disability made me literally start thinking about that, and then in converse, it made other people around me think about it as well. So I think about it as a blessing that has happened that enabled me to have more time and to spend that time wisely. So yeah, in the morning when I go in at 3:00 in the morning to get my treatments, I take all my European calls, all my East Coast calls, and then everybody on the West Coast always wonder why I know about everything before they do.
Wow. Where do you think that strength in you comes from? Like to just be like, great, I just got a new job. I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna double down.
Yeah, there's a phrase that comes from the Black community that says find a way or make one. And I think that was the way I went into it when I had it, was just that, okay, well, we're here. You're gonna mourn a little bit. Even when I was a founder and we had difficulty raising money, or doors were closed, we operated as if we said, okay, well, we can't get money from venture. Let's go to like the basketball community, or let's go to the entertainment community. And I think that resilience, a lot of people who are immigrants, a lot of people who are women, a lot of people who are people of color, you tend to think that way because you have no other option, no other choice. I was talking to a different founder. We were talking about just why I love funds that focus on immigrants, because when I'm here in LA, I see people who are immigrants who are here selling products on the street, and that tenacity, that resilience is something that their children inherited as they're building their companies as well.
Oh, totally. I see the immigrants are sort of the original entrepreneurs here, right?
Absolutely. And we keep talking about privilege, and I think a lot of times we only think about privilege and race, but we have to think about we're privileged here as Americans. Mm-hmm. We're privileged here as citizens. So we have to think about that piece of it when we're looking at founders from different places. And then also too, one of the things I think about is, how do I make way for the next generation after me?
Have you had people, like you're talking about sort of making way for the next generation, have you had people that have changed your trajectory?
Oh, absolutely. In addition to people who I've never met, another person who is so dear to me, but she is still my hero you had on the show, is Tracy Gray. Tracy what Tracy has taught me was to be a warrior and an advocate for those who are often unheard. I've always been that way, but I think there was a bit of a fear in me being as vocal. But if you've ever met Tracy, and anybody has ever listened to her talk, I even been on your show, Trace is an advocate for those voices who are rarely heard.
Yeah, she inspires me too. I'm just trying to find a way, like, how do I bottle all of, I feel like you learn so much, but without having to get stage 5, kidney disease to have all of this wisdom.
But I think you had to. I think, and if I may, and I do have to do this because I think faith is a very much part of me, and I hope that the other people who have faith, they don't hide it in our industry. And I think that's the thing that I hate, that people hide whatever their faith is. But I believe that there's a phrase that says your steps are ordered. And what that means for me is that these things were supposed to happen the way they happened, and everything kind of come together. And I may not have seen it. And even when it's happened, I may not realize that even me being a poetry major, I never would have thought I would be in finance when I first started. I literally was going to be in music. And I think there are a lot of people in venture who have, like me, business degrees, MBAs, what have you. But you have to look at the other side and really kind of use the other side of your being to make you a whole person. And it's about being authentic now. I think authenticity is the key word for 2021.
Love it. Taj, thank you so much. I'm so excited for Include Ventures and that you really have the capital to move the needle and pave the way for the future. And thanks for coming on the pod.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Minnie, for having us. And I say us because I'm including my dog and my son who were making all this noise in the very beginning. We're excited what Include can do. We're excited to include those voices that have not been included historically in the industry. And even more importantly, I'm excited to ensure that not just California, not just the Bay, not even just LA, that all these other places get an opportunity to create innovation, because that's what's going to truly make America great.